what is the status of motherhood today in a world where marriage is put off, kids are put off, the fertility rate is dropping dangerously low? And do we have a culture that holds up on a pedestal careerism versus motherhood and staying at home, which, by the way, Christianity seems to be going right along with, just a few steps behind? Of course, I believe in options for every woman. My wife works full time now that our kids are gone. My 2 daughters work full time. They're well educated. So I think that options all need to be there, of course. But where do we hold motherhood among all of these revolving parts? I came across an article written by Leah Libresco Sargeant, who is an author that covers religion and statistics. She just came out with a recent book called The Dignity of Dependence, a Feminist Manifesto, where she attempts to approach feminism on its terms by inserting her own values that are much more conservative. She also runs the Substack called Other Feminisms. She's very articulate and has plenty to say. I think you're going to really enjoy this. Now, this episode is brought to you by Go and Do Travel and our Wavemakers podcast crews. I've been pumping this as much as I can. It is going to be an absolute blast. We're going down the Mexican Baja. We have several high-profile podcasters and YouTubers in the Latter-day Saint online community that will be there. We've got Jacob Hansen of Thoughtful Faith and Carden Ellis of Ward Radio, Hayden and Jackson Paul from Stick of Joseph, Jasmine Rapoli, David Boyce of 52 Churches in 52 Weeks, and Dave Butler of Plain and Precious Things. This is going to be, really, it's going to be fantastic. We'll have a lot of fun. We'll have a lot of great presentations and an opportunity to mix and mingle with those YouTubers and podcasters and with that online community that we're very familiar with, but in person. Go to cwicmedia.com, up to trips and events, and then scroll down to Wavemakers Podcast. This is November 15th through 22nd, and would love to see you there. Here's the interview. Right, so Leah, going back in time, we look historically at technological advances. We go everything from the washing machine, vacuum cleaners, laundry, dishwashers, et cetera. There's all these different things, and technology seems to kind of address these things, right? Things of convenience. And so the role and need, say, of a domestic wife mother historically is starting to change, going back especially in the 19th century. And then we come all the way up to the pill in the late 50s, early 60s, which to me is the biggest cultural change of any technology anywhere that happens in the late 50s, early 60s. And we're moving all the way up now to this freezing of eggs, which is, again, a convenience. It fills a role. It's an important thing, I think, but it can change the mindset of an individual, of a woman, in thinking about, well, do I defer to having kids or do I start having kids earlier on, which we're seeing a major shift in these days. Is technology overall a net plus for women and families, or is it a negative?
I think it is a net plus, but that doesn't absolve us of our duty to be good stewards of the tech we have and make prudent decisions. My first kid who was born was an emergency C-section. So I'm a direct beneficiary from a lot of the tech that means I'm here and she's here. We might both not have been otherwise. But that in no way means we use the good tech to excuse the bad tech or think of ourselves as just kind of passively participating in progress without making deliberate choices about what serves the human good and what doesn't. And the way I think about it is, technology helps us when it gives us more room, more leisure, more slack that we can devote towards being human beings, caring for each other, being connected to each other. So I like using my washing machine perfectly well. I'd be pretty sad if I just had food pods that popped out of my fridge to feed my family, because cooking for them is part of expressing love for them, right? And like the deliberate work, the engagement with the real world feels more central to me to being a human being, learning how to live within creation than personally scrubbing out every, mud stain on a pair of pants does. And even there, I think people can make different trade-offs. It can be that mending and fixing is more a part of how you care for the world and teach your children to care for it. But when you look at things like the pill, that's not just giving us more free time to spend doing things. It's not just, offloading a task, it's changing people's understanding of what sex is. It's making sex as something that connects you to a partner, and sex as something that is open to life, as two seemingly different things. And whenever we have tech, even when it's good tech, which I don't consider the pill to be, that kind of fundamentally changes our relationship with a basic human process, that's a moment to slow down and say, do we really endorse these changes? This is a part of being human that we mean to give up.
So we come down to the point of you wrote an article recently for Fair Disputations, and you bring up a company called CoFertility, which was founded by one of the execs of Uber. And she had a personal issue with this. She was worried about having kids later on in life. She had dedicated her life to a career, and she's 35 years old, and she's saying, okay, well, what am I going to do here? I've only got a few years left. How do I make sure I'm going to have kids going forward? So she's trying to solve a problem for her, right, in using technology here. But you call CoFertility's offer, freezing eggs, as an example of, you quote, a modern day Rumpelstiltskin riff. Okay. What does this image, this metaphor capture about the moral and emotional cost of these fertility deals?
Well, CoFertility is a little unusual. The reason I reached for Rumpelstiltskin as the analogy there is CoFertility helps much younger women freeze their eggs to store for when they're older in case they need them. And it lets them do that for free because half of their eggs have to be donated to paying clients of CoFertility who are getting those younger women's eggs and then are having those younger women's biological children. So it's locking your future at the cost of giving up some of your children to whom you are a mother, even though they'll also then have this adoptive or gestational mother. And again, that's that question of trying to take a lot of basic human functions that a mother has always been until very recently, the woman who is genetically the mother of a child, the woman who carries the child, and then the woman who mothers the child. And when there's a break in those linkages, like through adoption, it's a response to tragedy. It's not something we engineer for its own sake. Mm-hmm. And I think the more you look at fetal development and how children grow up, babies, when they're born, recognize their mother's heartbeat in a way they don't recognize the heartbeat of anyone else. So you're kind of unwinding these pieces of being human without that much thought about what they do for people and what you give up by reformulating humans.
So it's interesting there, because if you look at fertility as an economy in itself, right? What seems to be happening in that case, in the description you give there, is that you are trading your children in your youth, giving it to somebody else who wants that, for your youth personally, right? It's more, I mean, honestly, it's more of a selfish type of a move to say, I want my youth, I want my career, I want to travel, I want to postpone the responsibility of this perhaps. And in return, I'm going to give this to someone else who perhaps wants to take on that responsibility right now, whether it's a younger person or an older person, an older woman. There is a trade there. You're giving up what would have been possibly your kids as a younger woman to someone else so that you've got your own personal time.
Well, and I would say it's not, I think, experienced by women who are doing this as selfish, but I think it's a bad trade-off. I think women often think about a sense of responsibility to their kids in the future as much as a selfish desire to travel or do things in their 20s. They think, how could I be a good mother when I'm unsettled in my career, when the young men around me don't seem like they're ready to get married? So how can I maximize my chance of being a good mother later when I'll presumably be better prepared to be a mom versus right now? There's a great ethnography of women who do egg freezing called Motherhood on Ice. And a lot of the women are not women in their 20s. CoFertility is marketing to those women because it needs their eggs. But women in their 20s mostly don't opt for egg freezing. It's women in their late 30s who are trying to extend their last chance at having a child when it feels like the possibility is almost out of reach. And a lot of the time when that happens, they feel less like they've picked career over family and more like they kept wanting to pick family but didn't see the opportunity arise. And I think that's really where people need to think about family not just being a thing that could happen to you in the future or that you'll be best prepared for when you're in your 30s, or that people all around you have to mature for it to be a possibility. People are ready to be parents earlier than they think, in part because you grow and change with your children.
So I think that's right. I do think that mostly it's women that are, number one, they've got the resources to take care of this. Number two, their biological clock, the sound of that ticking is much louder. But I mean, CoFertility, what I understand is as you said, it is free, right? You're going to have it done for free. So doesn't that target the younger woman in that case?
It certainly does. And I think target is the right point, because as is the case with many free services like social media sites, when it's free for you, something about you is being sold to someone else. And I assume CoFertility does a certain amount of screening. So I wouldn't assume it's free for all women. It's free for women who are going to be attractive donors to CoFertility's stable of actual paying clients, right? When I was in college, there were ads for egg donors, and there it's not the pitch to freeze your own eggs for your own use later. It's just a pitch of cold, hard cash in exchange for helping someone else start a family. And those donor advertisements are very exhaustive in terms of, you have to be this tall, you need to play at least one sport, you should be of this ethnicity, eye color, etc. Because fundamentally, what egg purchasing companies are doing is trying to satisfy the desires of their clients, which often go beyond just, I want to give a home to a baby and I'm struggling with infertility, but I want to be the author of this baby. I want the baby to have certain traits I value, which my love is conditioned on.
Yeah, it's that opens up something completely different. It to me, I mean, I understand it. If I was in that situation, I'd probably would do the same thing. But it also removes the differences of you not knowing what you're getting necessarily, whether it's the sex, whether it's the eye color or anything else, and saying, I love this person no matter what. Right. Yes. This is my child. I am the mother or the father of this child, and I love this person no matter what. There just seems to be a little bit of, again, it's an issue of convenience. And in some ways, not completely, but in some ways it seems that convenience on a balance is the opposite end of that can be a requirement of love.
I think it matters a lot that children are unchosen, right? That's why the phrase is about being open to life rather than even just acquiring a child through sex, would be a weird way of putting it. You can want a child very badly and not receive them. You can want a child and then be surprised by who they are. You can be surprised, at 10 weeks when if you're me and you're the kind of person who does the blood test to find out right away what gender of baby you're having. And I do that because I like to name my baby right away. Mm-hmm. But you can be surprised and even disappointed at that point. You can be surprised after birth, learning more about who your child is. Your child may be more athletic than you, less interested in art that you love. And you love them the whole time because what you sign up for in a child is just the gift of a person, an individual human soul who is given to you in particular to love. You don't get to customize them. You don't get to specify your criteria, and you then get to watch their life unfold, all of it as a gift. Sometimes better than you would have asked for, sometimes different than you would have asked for, but you get to rest in that love and their unchosenness forever.
Yeah, and that's, I think, an important aspect. Now, you use the metaphor of a ribbon unspooling, right, for a timeline, which is kind of interesting, right? And this is to describe life, your own life, and your relationships, for example, marriage, where eventually if you're married, you have now two ribbons together unspooling. How has this view shaped the way you think about marriage and parenthood?
I think the thing it really reminds you is when you delay things, you don't get to have them maybe necessarily at the best time of your life, which is how people think about when they put off marriage till I know enough about myself or till I've settled my career. We put the kids off even further till we've got enough in the bank. You don't get the same amount of marriage or the same amount of kids. And you think about that as that ribbon. My ribbon of life is finite. My husband's ribbon of life is also finite. And what I'm picking is not, if I wait longer, I'll find necessarily an even better husband. All I'm guaranteeing is I'll have less husband, less time. When people think with those questions of, is the right thing to do to wait to be responsible till much later in life to have kids, you don't necessarily get a better life. You may or may not, but you guarantee you have less of your life that overlaps with your kids' lives and even less with your grandkids' lives, especially if your kids take your example and wait till their late 30s to have kids. And then, you were 36, they were 36, now you're 72 as your grandkids are born. You may not be able to lift them or play with them or babysit them in the way you might have hoped. So I think when things are good, it makes more sense to plunge into them earlier. None of us know how long we will live. I hope to live a long life and see grandchildren, but if I live a shorter life, if my children live a shorter life, what I can rejoice in is whatever time we get to share and having more of it by virtue of embracing them earlier.
Yeah, and you explain also, when you do that and you're unfurling the ribbons, you don't know when it ends.
Exactly.
You don't know where that in the timeline is going to end. It's still wrapped around whatever it's wrapped around.
And I think the sense that you're trying to, time things carefully, like you're buying and selling stocks on the market, you're trying to, sell at the peak, creates a sense of that you both have more control over what will happen and how long it will happen for. I have 3 living children and 6 children I lost to miscarriage. And each time when you're pregnant, you don't know how that pregnancy will end. I started to have more worry than other people because of my history. And so each time I was pregnant, 3 of those children made it to birth, but I wouldn't know for weeks what would happen. And so I had the choice of saying, well, is this kind of not real to me because I don't know what will happen? Or do I know, well, today my child is alive, as I want to think about what does being a mom to this baby look like today while I'm pregnant in this moment that could be the only week we share together. And I'll never regret kind of loving my children wholly, deeply, fiercely for whatever amount of time we have. The children who made it to birth, I never think, oh, well, I loved them too much in the first trimester when I was nervous. I should have saved that for later. And the children I lost, I'm glad that sometimes my husband and I went to playgrounds and just sat and thought about the children, right? And we didn't get to hold them. So we wanted to make sure we were doing something to actively spend time with them in utero, knowing we might or might not see them face to face.
Yeah, I had a recent conversation with a female therapist, and she argued with me about making sure that we hold off on marriage and that we hold off on having kids. And her reasoning was, number one, your frontal lobe is not even developed enough to make the best decisions until you're 25 or 26, cortex or whatever it's called. And secondly, give yourself a chance to have a career and make your choices, get to know your partner a lot better, she said, and make sure that you have an understanding of how far you want to go in your career before you have kids. So there are all these other logical things to think of and to have in place. And so she typically is taking women who have anxiety, who have depression, and she's interpreting it in a way that says, well, you have taken on too much too early without thinking of yourself first. What would you say to someone like her?
I think there are a couple careers where you can really plan around, well, by this year I'll do this, and on this year I'll make a partner, et cetera. Most careers aren't like that, especially right now. I'm someone who's more typical of my generation. I've held a number of different jobs, and to progress in my overall career, it's meant looking for opportunities, changing positions, not moving in a predictable, steady way up a promotion track at one company that I'll retire from after 40 or 50 years with a watch, right? And so if your life is marked by more uncertainty, you can say, well, there's more uncertainty, so I want to be more cautious. I want to wait longer because I don't know what will happen. Or you can say, you know what? I know a lot less about what the right time will be than I might have thought, or even than my parents knew. So I want to lean hard into the things I think are good right away. And that includes marriage, and that includes children. And I expect, whether I get married early or have kids early or not, there will be some turbulence in my career. And I think my whole life will be better if, while my career has ups and downs, I have someone next to me who I love, who I'm doing this with. And I'll be happy if during the days when I'm having a tougher time at work, or if I get laid off, I'm coming home to my kids and I can kind of rest secure in my identity as a mom alongside my more fragile and contingent identity as a worker at this company. And that will stay constant through my whole life, while other things sometimes are better and sometimes are worse.
Yeah,
I mean, I think there's a reason the traditional marriage vows are about for better, for worse, for sickness, and for health, and not for this totally placid time ahead now that we've squared everything away and found ourselves and established everything. Marriage is built for uncertainty.
It's built for uncertainty, and it should be built for kids. In my mind, that should be what it's built for. I got married when I was 23.
Mm-hmm.
Had my first child when I was 25. And there are so many benefits to this. No, am I ready for it? No, I'm not ready for it. I don't think anybody's ever ready for it. I'm not ready for marriage. I'm not ready for it to be a father. I'm not ready for any of these things. But what it does is it puts you in a position where you say, am I going to stand up with this? Am I going to step up for what needs to be done, grow up, take on the responsibility? And it just seems to me that in our culture today, we have moved to a position of convenience and avoiding responsibility. And that thing seems to me to be a big part of that. I'm pushing off marriage because I'm not ready to commit. And it's not always that way. I'm not saying it's always that way. I think there are some difficulties in the dating scenes today that push that off also, in economics, et cetera. But a push off of responsibility seems to be a common theme to me. Of, hey, I want to take this on now. I want to go through the difficulties that are there for marriage, which also produce joy. And I want to go through the difficulties of being a parent and take on that responsibility because of the fruits of what that produces. Do you see it that way?
I think partly people sometimes have such a great respect for marriage and children that they think they're not equal to it, and they almost never will be, right? That's that sense of, that less selfish sense of, I want to grow into this responsibility, but I have to grow into it while not doing it, right? I don't expect the institution of marriage to help me be a better husband. I don't expect the experience of being a father to a baby to make me a better father. I've got to go get good at this first without practical experience and then enter into the institution. And I think that's also related to the rise of secularism, where if you don't think God has your back for any of this, right, then it does create greater pressure of, I want to be married. I want to make all these lifelong promises, but can I keep them? Am I a good enough person to keep them? And, the Christian facing marriage thinks, well, I hope I'm going to keep them, but I also know I'm not relying solely on my own strength. And I think the more people feel that they're operating purely with their own strength, their own conscience, their own moral fiber, and nothing else outside that, the more they feel, slightly accurately, I'm not up to the task of loving one woman forever with my whole self. Like, I can't do that by myself. I'm not up to the task of what's the full range of what a baby could ask of me. And the reality is, you're not doing it on your own. You have the support of your spouse, but you have the support of a loving God. But if you don't believe that, it's harder to enter into any of those things.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a completely different mindset. If you take a secular view of that, it's a completely different mindset. Number one, I think even a foundation that's already in place that says this is the order of God, number one, and I think it's the right thing. And then number two, saying, well, because it's the order of God and it's the right thing, I've got someone I can lean on. I've got God that I can lean on and fill the void of any inadequacies that I might feel. So that's a great point. Now, you talk about taking on projects that are too large for one life.
Yes.
Right. And you have children as one of those. What other projects do you think modern people should be brave enough to begin?
I'm a nerd, and I'll admit it. I think space travel is one of those. I don't love Elon Musk's approach to his family life, but I love his approach to rockets, right? And this question of what is the kind of big science or big engineering that will change the world, but in a way I may not live to see. And I think you don't have to go to Mars to do that. Friends I know who have taken on projects like that, though a little less explosive, one would hope, have founded a school in their local community where you're around for most of the most turbulent, difficult years. And in the long term, this may become a sustaining school that your community grows up around, where kids these are classical academies, reading the great books together, growing deeper in friendship, more connected to history, more prepared for education and conscience, to live generously and to love the good. But if you found a school, you were signing up for 8 to 10 turbulent, financially fragile years. And then by the time things seem stable enough that you can step back, the school will have grown past your recognition and you will be old. And your kids will have aged out of the range of it, right? So those are folks taking on a real project of stewardship for something whose fruits they know they will not fully enjoy.
You know, you talk about all the million no's that come with having children, the things you have to turn down, the things that you sacrifice for yourself. But you say those no's make sense if you have a big yes. Okay. What is the yes for you? And talk about how you make peace with making these sacrifices.
You know, for me, a lot of the big yes to my kids is that, you know, I hope they'll be saints of God, right? Like, I hope that their lives are really transformed by knowing his love. And it's my job to provide a small image of that. And so sometimes that means a less full or less busy life, because I want the leisure and space for peace and for exploration with each other. You know, my daughter just decided spontaneously, who's 5, that she wants to build a big house out of cardboard. And she's just taking on this project. It's taken over our dining table. When we have friends over, we have to kind of apologetically, but not too apologetically, clear it out of the way. Our whole house is messier than it would be in the ideal, not just with cardboard, but with everything else. And part of that's because we give our children a lot of space for creative pursuits where we don't know how they'll unfold. And I think embracing uncertainty is a huge part of being a parent. And sometimes it's, gosh, like, it's been awfully quiet and I know they have scissors with them. I wonder what's happening where my children are, you know, that kind of nervous uncertainty. But ultimately, it's a preparation for the uncertainty of sending our kids out into the world to make families of their own, and knowing we won't author their lives, and that my job is to prepare them to make good, prudent, generous, trusting decisions, and really communicating as a Christian that, you know, the dice are loaded in their favor as long as they're acting out of love and generously towards others.
Yeah. You quote, I don't know, I'm not going to say his name right. It's Tom Skocha.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what his name is, but he says, you are not banking extra years by deferring children, right? You are subtracting years from the time you will share the world with your children. I think that's such an important point to understand. Last year, my son, my 3rd child, he and I went to Spain and ran with the bulls. Now, I probably can't do that in 10 years, right? I can't do that in 10 years, but that's my 3rd child. And he was 27 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still out there running with him and doing this. That was an incredible experience for us. Very bonding. It was a wonderful experience, right? If I'm waiting another 10 years, and we come to that point at this point in my life or his life, you know, we're not going to be able to do something like that. I'm not going to spend that time with him doing that kind of activity, right? A couple of years ago, I went up major mountains with my other son. And so that's something I can still do with them even while they're adults, because I had children younger. I would not trade that for anything.
Yeah. And
right?
You know, being parents of young kids really brings home to us how much our parents do for us, like, and how much our kids love having grandparents and how rich and varied it makes their life. It brings home to me, I love my mother more now as a parent because I see and hear from her more about my own earliest years and how she felt as a mother, as we kind of talk about, what did you do when this happened? And I want to share that with my kids, you know, and I'm grateful that our kids have 3 living grandparents. My dad passed away a few years ago. And again, there's that question of, okay, you know, I'm not just thinking about, well, what do I want to be like as a mom? And can I be a better mom if I wait 3 years, 4 years? It's, well, what does it look like to be a grandparent? I'm getting a glimpse of that now. And what will prepare me to do that? And how much of that do I want? I want a lot of it. It seems wonderful.
Yeah. Now you challenge the idea of before marriage life is a neutral, right? For parent, you know, why is it so important to claim reality? And I'm going to say also responsibility for that reality right now, or when, you know, earlier than we're doing as a culture right now.
You know, the thing I say a lot, you know, to folks when I'm chatting with them is just this right now, wherever you are, is your real life. There's no part of your life that's kind of the training section or the demo part where you're learning, who am I? What will I do? You are who you are. You are what you're doing right now. So, you know, whether you're waiting for marriage or for kids or for something else, or to finish school or get the job you need, your real life is always still happening right now. And you're never promised that you're going to reach that goal you want, to marry, even if you want it, to have children, even if you long for them. And you may find that large stretches of your life are the period you thought of as kind of the waiting room for your real life that will never begin in the way you hoped. So whatever life you live, you want to live sacrificially for others with deep friendship, strong gifts, no's for the sake of a yes again, even if it's not specifically for your spouse and kids. So you're never off the hook, right? When people are like, well, in my single days, I can do whatever I want. No, in your single days, you have to die for the sake of your friends, right? Or die to self out of love for others. And that's always true. Marriage is just the most common way of doing it. But your real life is always happening right now. And your real life involves deep sacrificial love for others.
Now, you speak beautifully about how your friends invited you into motherhood by asking you to be a godmother. This is, I think, is a wonderful, wonderful Catholic tradition that is, I wish more of us had that. And where you're asked to give a little bit of responsibility, toward other children, right? Even if you don't have any of your own at this point. How did that help you in inviting you into being a mother?
It was a big gift for me because this came during the period where we were having miscarriages. So, I had a heart for motherhood. I was loving the children God gave us as best I could, but that still wasn't the way I wanted to get to love a child. And again, I had that sense both of, well, one day this will happen for me. And as it happened, it did. But also, I have to find a way of living and loving that doesn't presume I will ever carry a child to term successfully. And my friends really gave me that opportunity by saying, look, we want you to be part of our lives forever, to be personally concerned with the spiritual development of our child and have that continuing relationship where you're going to know them as a baby, as a toddler, as a teenager, years from now. I'm a godparent for someone's whole life. So I will know them as themselves a mother, as someone who is, if I'm old enough, when I'm still living, if it was 50, I'll be a godmother now, no longer to a child, but to an adult, an older adult. And that sense of my life being so closely knit with someone else permanently meant a lot to me as a reassurance that I could give my love fully, whatever the circumstances of my fertility held.
So much of our culture today, I was driving just a while ago. There's a university here close to me, and there was a billboard up. And the billboard said, basically, it was it was Northern Arizona University. Come to Northern Arizona University because it's all about you, right? That was the billboard. Mm-hmm. And this is a very common thing, that we're pushing in advertising in our culture. And unfortunately, I think it results in bad choices when our lives are not, the longer you're in a position of what I would say something like Never Neverland. You're sitting in Never Neverland without growing up and creating bonding long-term relationships that are best manifest, I think, in family, right? The longer you're pushing that off or avoiding it completely, I think you're missing a purpose of life, and you're missing a joy that cannot be found anywhere else. Is there any way that we're going to be able to reverse the speeding train that I see in our culture moving towards self instead of understanding that our true happiness and joy comes through these entangled relationships that are beautiful and as far as a believer goes, it's the only thing that we take with us.
I don't know if this is going to be enough to turn us around, but I think, kind of the demographic trends where we have more and more older people and fewer kids is really going to force people to reckon with the cost of not being connected to others and the need to affirmatively choose to be. Because we're going to have more and more older folks dying without children, without grandchildren to be with them and hold their hand, to care for them. And I think the challenge is when we see what that looks like, that's already priced in, like that's coming already based on who has and hasn't had kids. So are we going to, in the face of that intense need, that intense vulnerability at the end of life, step up and make bigger choices to actively care for people, to bring them into our family kind of in a parallel way that Godparenthood brings a baby into your family at the beginning of that child's life? What we think about, how do we actively make the elderly unrelated to us part of our lives to see them out of the world with love? Or are we going to see what's increasingly the case in Canada and now newly in the United Kingdom, that turn towards euthanasia and discarding the elderly because they are not connected strongly to anyone, or because even when they do have kids and grandkids, we think of their need as somehow misserving their children, that parents are meant to give children what they need and then step back or even remove or destroy themselves if their need imperils their kids' lives, rather than saying, yes, what being a parent is caring fully for your children when they are very dependent. And then in your old age, kind of returning to that second infancy where you need your diapers changed and you need someone to sit up with you in the nighttime. And your children do that because they love you. And that's the shape a human relationship takes. And you haven't misserved your children by being a human parent to them. Think about what the alternative is.
Now, you work in family policy, influencing and creating policy. Do you think that policy can help in that regard? Is it not enough? Do you think that policies like baby bonuses that's being talked about now, or subsidized childcare, can shift at a minimum fertility trends that we're seeing right now that are, to me, the biggest outside of our soul of a culture right now that is being disintegrated? The most important temporal issue I think we have is the fertility rate.
Yes.
And it's very, very concerning. But can policies like this at least shift that fertility trend?
They can shift it a bit, right? They giving people money when they have kids helps them have kids, and helps them have them earlier instead of waiting as long and delaying or maybe not succeeding at all by the time they try, or turning to egg freezing, because it's easier to have kids when you're younger. And so if you have a $2,000 baby bonus available, then maybe two parents who wanted to try for a kid this year but weren't sure if they could might feel a little more comfortable taking the leap. So we know it has effects on the margin. People have kids a little earlier, a little closer together, and a little more often. And the other good thing to remember is these policies that make life easier for parents, they aren't coercing people to have kids they don't want. We know from survey research that women on average in the US want, because it's an average, half a child more than they're having, which means that some people are happy, but there's a lot of unmet desire for children out there. So you can think of a lot of government policy as, it doesn't teach people children are good in and of itself. It doesn't by itself change people's minds about children in a big way, but it takes this unmet demand and makes it easier for people to have the children they long to have and to do right by them in a way they may fear they otherwise will struggle to do. It's not enough. It's a piece of the equation. It's kind of lowering the wall for those people who want kids but can't get over it. Mm-hmm. And then there are a lot of people who I think would have rich, fulfilling lives with children, but don't think about it in a timely way. And for that, a baby bonus isn't changing your mind. That takes the witness of people in your community who are parents or your parents to talk about it and say, I value your ability to give and receive love as much as I value your career. And I don't want you to miss out on either. So how will you balance them? Not how will you set one aside in favor of the other?
Yeah, I will say, I think that it is an issue. As policy can change in terms of a baby bonus. You've got housing prices are through the roof, and there's things that can be done there that will help incentivize people to put down roots, get married, have children, etc. And those are policy issues that can change and that can help. But I do think that there needs to be a very strong cultural change. I'm not sure if we can get that. But I do think there needs to be a strong cultural change as well. I want to go back to the egg freezing just for a minute. Vox wrote, an online magazine wrote something about this new technology. And here's what they said. They said, egg freezing has become like a mantra for how to be an independent woman. Right? The people who have frozen their eggs are doing a cool new thing. Okay. So what I want to bring out of that is this. This brings up a very fundamental question. And it's a contrast, I believe, of feminism and modern culture versus a traditional perspective, a biological perspective, and I would say a God-given model of interdependence. We talk about those entangled relationships, right? Why is the appeal there seems to be, I mean, it's working, this advocacy for being an independent woman that is buoyed by a thriving feminism. Why is this so appealing to women?
I'd say two things for that. One is just a lot of our culture communicates hatred for or disgust with people who depend on others. And women are correct in thinking, if I have a baby, not only will someone depend on me, but pregnancy makes me physically vulnerable. I will be physically weaker. More of my whole being will be directed towards this baby, and I will need other people's help. Now, if you live in a culture where needing other people's help because the baby depends on you and that makes you need other people, makes you disgusting, inhuman, in countries with euthanasia, illicit target for killing. Obviously, it sounds better to be independent. It sounds better to try and put off that period of intense physical dependency for as long as you can, or try and stock up enough money that you'll be able to solve all your problems of dependency with hired help, rather than by needing people in as direct and relational a way. So I think when women feel that desire to be fully independent and autonomous, that comes from the way we communicate our failure to love children, the elderly, the disabled, pregnant women. That's a real message we're giving. And the second thing I'd say about egg freezing in particular is feminism, I think for its whole history, has always been a noisy conversation at best, an active fight at worst. And there's certainly strains of feminism that look at the way that businesses will actively subsidize egg freezing for their employees and say, you know what, what's going on here? Is this something that's being given to you, a female employee, as a gift? Or is this your boss trying to make sure he has the claim on your youngest, most energetic years and that your family doesn't?
Interesting.
So, you get some strains of feminism that have more of the sense of it's great to free yourself from your biology. Your biology is fundamentally a bad thing for you. Your potential to give life is mostly a danger to you. And you have other, I think, more fruitful strains of feminism that say, you know what? When someone says they can buy you out of your fertility, why are they offering to do that for you? And why do they see your womanhood as a threat to what they can pay you for at work?
Yeah. I think we came across you on Substack. And so you've got a Substack that's called Other Feminisms.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that?
So, I'm a woman raised by a second wave feminist. I would say we have our agreements and our disagreements. But what I think is the fundamental truth that attracts people to feminism in any of its variations is just it requires something specific to advocate for women as women. And when you consider the human race neutrally, you first of all wind up kind of male skewed when you think about what does a neutral human being look like. And you ultimately wind up shortchanging both men and women. Where I situate my own form of feminism is really saying that men and women are equal in dignity, but being equal in dignity doesn't require that we be interchangeable. And where I see kind of the primary error of some strains of modern feminism is trying to make sure it's proving men and women should be treated fairly and similarly, and is willing to throw parts of being a woman out the window because they represent a threat to that idea that men and women are the same. I don't think we have to be the same to be equal in dignity and equal under the law.
Well, I think also one of the issues that I see, I think that it does concern me because I look at the tree of feminism, right? And the fruit of that feminism, there is a spectrum. You've got first, second, third wave feminism. You've got radical feminism. You've got white feminism, intersectional feminism, all these things. But to me, to some degree, it's still the fruit of that original tree that is based on an ideological agenda that does say that, yeah, somehow we need to force it. What it really comes down to me is are we trying to be like men? Mm-hmm. And when you start with that assumption, there's nothing that to me can come out of that except division, number one, and a constant movement that goes nowhere to some degree, at least nowhere good, because it's an impossibility. right?
Yes.
If you are there, because you're never going to get to a place where women are the same as men. And I don't mean as one higher than the other. I mean, they're not the same, as you say.
Yes.
And so if you're trying to force this as a sameness, it's never going to happen. So you'll always have the objective in place.
And you'll always wind up hating women somewhat, for not being able to achieve it, right? That's always the challenge. Now, I don't think that idea of women have to be able to be men is at the very historical roots of the movement. I think it's always a question, right? Because the easiest way to prove you're equal is by doing the exact same thing in the exact same way. So there's always that temptation to say, well, can we make the case for our equality this way? And there are places where that's appropriate, in a workplace of saying, well, I'm doing the same job. Can't I be treated the same way? But that's not who women are fundamentally. And I think when you look back at the very beginnings of feminism, often Mary Wollstonecraft is identified as one of the first feminists. And Erika Bachiochi in her book, The Rights of Women, kind of does a lovely job explicating this. She founded a lot of her claims that women were entitled to more schooling, that they were excluded from, on the basis of women's potential to be mothers. So she wasn't saying women should be able to go to school with men because women and men are exactly the same and exactly equivalent. And where they aren't exactly the same, we should pretend they are the same or get rid of the parts of women that make them different. She said, look, women are oriented to be mothers. And part of being a mother is giving a full education to your children. And if women themselves aren't given that education, then they can't give a moral education to their children. So you always have that tension from that very beginning of, as people are making the case for women's rights, for women's dignity, are they doing it on the basis of, we're all just basically human beings and anything that sticks out as different is inconvenient or needs to be lopped off? Or are they looking to some things that are particular to women, like motherhood, and saying, based on the fact we are mothers or have the capacity to be mothers, as Wollstonecraft said, we need education. And then when we come to the US, the women's rights movement, the suffrage movement are all really have a lot of overlap with the temperance movement. And a lot of that is saying, look, as mothers, as wives, we have this political insight about the destructiveness of alcohol and the way it preys on vulnerable men that is being excluded. And we want to be fully included in politics because we see how women and children, as women and children, are being misserved by the politics we have.
Would you say that, and again, you've got different branches of feminism that come out from that trunk, but would you say that as a generalization, that feminism's goal is an independent woman? And if it's independent, is that independent of everything? Because that seems to go against what you've been saying so far, and this kind of leads into your recent book that you wrote.
I'd say there are two goals that are in tension. One is the sense of, I want women to be safe. And that's kind of a harm reduction feminism. And that's where you get more of that desire for independence, because you respond to real dangers in the world and say, okay, well, what will it take to make women safe from these things? You need enough money, enough space, enough legal defense. A lot of those individual goals I support. Women can have a career, can earn money, have certain protections that are often asymmetrical from domestic violence, responding to the reality of men and women's bodies. But if you stop there, that's kind of a negative freedom. Women deserve to be free from these particular dangers or oppressions, etc. And what I want is also the positive freedom for motherhood, freedom to love expansively, freedom in order to put our bodies at risk through pregnancy. And if you just start with that safety mindset of how will I make women safe from the world, you wind up ultimately always looking at femininity, motherhood, fertility as one of those threats coming interiorly, right? Because pregnancy does make women unsafe. Even when we improve medicine, it makes women unsafe because it's physically hard and it puts you at physical risk. So I don't think we ever should start our politics from the idea of our goal is to make people utterly safe, drive risk to zero. It's always that trade-off of, we're made for flourishing. What risks are good? How do we cushion the risk as best we can? But how do we leave people free to enter into these relationships that expose us to the needs of others?
So let's finish with this question. Where do you see the status of the American family today as compared to historically, and where is it going?
Well, I think one of the challenges is we're more prosperous than we've been at almost any time. There are real strains in terms of the cost of housing, et cetera, but we're freer of childhood disease. There's more money, a lot of good things. but people respond to them in a very nervous, and now this is not just feminism, but men and women, both in that more sense of seeking safety, seeking harm minimization. And of course, you're always minimizing your risk by not having children or having fewer children than you hoped for. And what I want people to do more is feel like the risks are worth it. And that the more you do take risks, and even set an example in your community and your friend circle of, like, we're hoping to have another baby. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with college costs. Like, we're going to figure that out in 18 years. We want to have another baby right now. The more that you have people shouldering that risk together. I live in a neighborhood where at my Catholic church, any mom who has a baby automatically gets 10 meals from the parish. People sign up. The more people take bigger risks together, and we may not go to Mars, with the rockets, but you have the sense of, I can take on things that I don't know if I can sustain all by myself, and we all wind up the richer for it. Because we step in when the other person falters. We expect other people will love us, not despise us for our need, and that they'll love our children and want to support us in having them. And I think it's that lack of trust that both one's own children are lovable by people who are not you, or that you will be lovable when you need help as a mother, that makes people so fearful, even in the face of material prosperity, medical advances, etc. And you almost hear the way people kind of reach for reasons to articulate why it's unsafe or bad to be a parent. Well, maternal mortality is very high. It's higher than it could be, but it's very low historically. Well, prices are high, job markets are unstable. There are challenges, but again, this is one of the best possible times to be alive, and America is one of the best possible places to live. What I think people articulate is this deep sense that other people won't care for them, or that when they are vulnerable, they will be tossed aside like trash in exactly the way we're learning to treat the elderly. And then you reach for medical or material excuses for that deep sense of uncertainty. But I think it comes out of our relationships with others.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time. We came across you on Substack. I love your writing. That is, you can be found then on Substack at Other Feminisms, correct?
That's right. Otherfeminisms.com. And you can find me in October.
Yes. And plug your book real quick.
With my new book, The Dignity of Dependence. And this is making the case for a pro-woman, fully pro-woman feminism, that we can't have a vibrant, reality-based feminism unless we're advocating for women as women rather than women as defective men.
Great. Leah Libresco Sargeant, really appreciate your time and your words, and you articulate things very well. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.